I guess you saw my dildo up there, and I tell people that's Osiris's, and that if they run into Isis, tell her I have it.
No, I was trying to figure out whether that actually was, or whether that was just some sort of like a mantelpiece, or
Well, I decided that was the most appropriate place for it to go. And it's in keeping with everything being vertical here in the apartment, practically, So I said, well, why not? Let me just stand it up there. Because it hadn't been used in years, and it was a holdover from my last significant relationship, actually. So that's the history of it.
Is that the last significant relationship?
Well, go on, talk to me.
Okay, it's Sunday, April 12th, sitting here with Essex Hemphill. This book, Ceremonies, is about to be published in June 25th, 1992.
Oh, they put a date on it?
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
I mean, what are your feelings going into the publication of this?
I'm nervous, because it's, there's likely going to be more exposure since I'm with a mainstream publisher. And I feel like there's a bit of a gamble whether or not a book of poetry and essays by a black gay poet and writer can really hold up in the marketplace and even cross over, if you will, if that's a safe term to use here. The crossover in the sense that can it show appeal and draw audience outside of lesbian, gay, and bisexual audiences and some segments perhaps of the black community. And I think that's got me really nervous in terms of looking at the book as a product, in that sense. In terms of the content of the book, I'm equally as excited. I think it is some of my best work gathered together to date. There's a lot of work that's available in anthologies and journals and different publication formats like that, but it's been 6 years since I've had a collection of any sort of my own work. Earth, Life, and Conditions, 85 and 86 respectively, they were chapbooks and self-published. So I'm excited about Ceremonies. I, in some ways, haven't been able to give it the kind of attention that I gave to Earth, Life, and to Conditions, and to Brother. In fact, I was working on Ceremonies prior to taking on the task of Brother, so that Ceremonies went to the back burner, essentially. And after I gained some control of Brother managing the project, I then found time to dip and dabble, to go in and out of working on Ceremonies. So it's all been bits and pieces. It's not been in the way that I'm normally used to working, where okay, this is the major project, so I lock in on that, and, you wind up devoting all of your energy, all of yourself to bringing that to completion. So it's an added bit of excitement, I guess, is to see what happens when you don't utilize that kind of strategy. And I feel like it's going to be successful. My spine tingles sometimes.
I mean, I find it hard to believe that you really think that it won't be, or that you have any fears that it won't be.
Oh,
because, I mean, it seems like the reception that a lot of Black and gay cultural productions are getting right now, at least the attention. I think, I mean, the market is ripe. I mean,
the time is now.
Yeah, it's so I think people are lining up. I mean, you could. I probably could sell bootleg copies on the street. I think.
In that color there, right? The green.
People come in, the store all the time, asking for stuff by you, or asking, all the time. I would almost venture at least every other day. So somebody asks me directly, and I mean, I think it'll be a huge success.
Well, I've got my fingers crossed. I really have. And I am excited. And the time that I did put into it was good time over a long period. I guess that's how I should really clarify things. With Brother to Brother, that's like 2 years, a concentrated period of 2 years.
Right.
With Earth, Life, and Conditions, respectively, there was a number of years put into, I shouldn't say a number of years in terms of the body of work represented, but then the actual production around Earth, Life, and Conditions, that was probably, about a year from conceiving of it, through working it through typography, typesetting, through then determining what graphic, paper stock, and all along saving money and, trying to get money, if you will, to make sure I'd be able to bring those two pieces forward.
Were those successful as far as
financially? Oh, yeah. Oh, well, see, the publication of Earth Life went a long way to help with the cost of Conditions. But additionally, then Conditions allowed for a second printing of Earth Life. So ultimately, it was a little over 6,000 copies out of a 3-4 year period. We're talking 85 through 89. And I went through 2 printings of Earth Life and 1 of Conditions. So I thought it best when I began working on ceremonies not to include or rather, I thought it best to include Earth, Life, and Condition selections because I didn't want to reprint either of the pieces, and I felt that those people who had supported me at the outset, and when I was knocking on doors with my little chapbooks and whatnot, that they have something that's really special, and something that doesn't, underneath everything else, speak of mass production, which, this book does speak of that. It's entering, I guess, the realm of popular culture in some ways.
I know, I could kick myself. I think, I first met you, I think, in 90, or at the reading that you gave at Tacoma Library, and I was one of the only 2 people.
Yes, wasn't that a mess? But I enjoyed that too.
Well, that was great. But what year would you think that? That must have been in...
That must have been 90, because I would have been working on Brother then still.
Yeah. And I remember, I had never seen your poetry in any bookstores or anything. But like a week later after I met you, I saw one, I'm not sure which one it was, at Chuck and Dave's in Tacoma Park. Are you familiar with that bookstore?
A bookstore there?
Yeah.
No, I'm not familiar.
The same people there also own that bookstore in DuPont Circle called...
Second Story?
No, they had a lot of sort of, a lot of political books.
Common Concerns?
Yeah, Common Concerns.
Oh, okay.
They also own that. And I saw one copy there, and I didn't have any money on me right then, and I couldn't get it. And I remember I came back like a few days later, and it was gone.
Oh, no.
That was the last time I ever saw, any of your work. But there's something you hit on. I should have written it down. There's something you hit on I wanted to ask you about. So as far as, if we're talking about timeline, the most recent pieces, when would they date from?
As much as last year. I'm trying to think of what's in there that represents, like, the one Fixing Things.
That's about your brother?
Right. There's a couple of them. The life cycles are I guess the life cycles in some ways, or the birth dates would run as far back as, what is this, 92? So we'd be talking maybe the oldest piece in there is To Some Supposed Brothers, and that was written while I was in high school. That was written in that was written in 1974.
That's the one.
You Judge a Woman.
What Judge a Woman by? Yeah.
And it still resonates.
It does. That's why that's why I was shocked that you said that it was written so.
I was in 11th grade when I wrote that.
Wow,
I would have been what, 17, 16, 17?
Quite impressive.
And then there is a break. You don't get anything else from the 70s. Then you would start with like 83, 84 forward. So, and that would be a piece like Balloons or Les Salon. Some of the work that's represented in Earth Life, that's represented in Ceremonies Now from Earth Life, the excerpts. That would be from that period. So it's from as early as 74 forward, To Some Supposed Brothers and then forward.
Well, what were you about in the 70s? What was going on with you in the 70s?
That was interesting. I was attending yoga classes, and I was running around with fringe elements of the Black nationalist movement, if you will. Men and women that I was meeting through my job after school and through my yoga classes as well. And they were turning me on to things like celebrating Kwanzaa and the 7 principles, considering a name change. They wore dashikis and were vegetarian, and I became vegetarian for a while. It's really interesting to think that a lot of what people are doing now, I was experiencing, at least around Afrocentricity, or seemingly practicing Afrocentric values in the sense of Kwanzaa, in the sense of other things that continue to, in the doing of them, work toward the empowering of Black communities, buying Black, etc. That happened so early on for me. And the various things I've gone through from that point, how my claiming sexual identity as a Black gay man, how that then challenged some of the things I'd learned from the Black nationalists, and ultimately had me moving away from Black nationalism as being too narrow a politic for the interests that reside in me and the kind of vision that's still growing and developing in me. It wasn't enough, just as an absolute lesbian and gay politic isn't enough either. So I do credit my empowerment around my sexuality as also having had the additional impact of then challenging certain Black nationalist notions, which ultimately I could see were not going to be good for me specifically. Hold on 1 minute.
Is that the cat?
Yeah. She's up too. I got you. No. Now you know that, right? It's all over your face. I'm sorry.
Those guys just trying to pause it, but I couldn't find it. So.
Okay.
Well, you mentioned like that you said that you were sort of into that, and now sort of a lot of people are into it again.
Yeah. Well, the Afrocentric
movement.
Right.
How do you what sort of way do you put that whole cycle together in your own mind? I mean, how do you view the sort of coming and now the coming again?
That we're revisiting that again. It's an interesting phenomena to be living and witnessing that. I guess that's what's made me a little cynical about Afrocentricity. Um, that how new is it really, particularly when it then deliberately or inadvertently reinforces things like misogyny and homophobia, etc., which, accompany black nationalist rhetoric and politic as well. I think it's very necessary to celebrate your culture, to empower yourself, to look for representation from your culture that leads toward strengthening you. I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. But I don't think you should be, while you're going for that from your home community, if you will, from your culture, tolerating disempowerment of other aspects of yourself from your community. So it's interesting because I wonder what does something like by any means necessary really mean to some of our younger black people. I wonder what does something like the icon of a Malcolm X really mean. Do they really understand how his identity was forged?
Yeah.
And what he represented, or was striving to represent by the time he was assassinated? Are they really clear about that? And that he was arriving at a point where the vision wasn't an absolute of black and white, but as I'd like to put it, he was beginning to see the complexity in the middle, the gray area, and how do you really then begin to address that, since I think that's where most of us live, is in that gray area, in that complexity that we've been struggling, I think, all this time to try to articulate and understand and all of those things that we've done and still do to try to live there in the middle. So to be revisiting this again, it's a visit with a little cynicism when I hear things that I threw off, this sexism, homophobia, the misogyny, things that I don't want in my life. When I hear that running up through the theory, through, well, this will make us stronger, but how can you be stronger just because you heal your leg but you cut off your hand to do that? That's really not making you stronger, that's just shifting, the malady, if you will, or the injury, if you will, or whatever one would want to call it.
Yeah, and to me it's a straight, it's nothing more than a lie to deny the fact that each human being is just extremely complex, and you can never narrow anybody down to sort of, whether it's the heterosexual family and that's going to make us stronger, anything you can't just...
Exactly.
That'll never work. I think one of the things that I always look to, though, is just sort of a positive light, is Huey Newton's letter talking about the women's movement, and I'm not aware of anything that's sort of come out of the new Afrocentric movement
that speaks in that way.
Yeah, that's done that. And
there hasn't been. I understand that Molefi Asante in a broadcast, which I have not seen the broadcast, so I'm only paraphrasing this even secondhand, but supposedly has reassessed his commentary about homosexuals, about gays and lesbians. But again, I have not. And supposedly he was challenged in an interview, a broadcast interview, and he repositioned himself somewhat, which is fine. I think there's got to be room for growth if that is the case. I don't know. The only thing I know is what's in black and white. You see what I'm saying? And until there is an amendment or a new work that, the repositioning is spelled out in black and white, then for this moment, I still hold that his theory, as he puts it forth, is also laden with homophobia, and for that reason, it's a theory promoting factionalization, and so for that reason, it's not really a functional theory.
Right.
It's not a functional way for me to move forth. And again, I know that we can go about nurturing and celebrating ourselves and empowering ourselves, but not put others at some disadvantage or disempowerment in order to do that, others within our own community, as black communities. I know that it's possible, that we don't have to be one another's scapegoats or the focal point of one another's anger. And so for that reason, I just have to be guarded. You know, even when people say, well, so-and-so is repositioned.
Yeah.
Well, let's face it, black fag life is very much in vogue right now.
Right.
And I think Marlon hit that on the head very clearly. That's why I said black fag life, which I think is different from a black gay life, which is still probably different from a black homosexual life. I think that the society, the popular culture, might be more tolerant of the spectacle of our lives, as opposed to the real, as opposed to dealing with the substance of our lives. Because I didn't want to posit spectacle as though it's not real. There is spectacle in black gay experience, black gay culture. There is spectacle, but that's but one aspect. And actually, it's more the it's a more inflamed aspect, if you will, because of spectacle. You see, but the nuts and bolts of what black gay people have to contend with day after day, that seems to be what the society has a lot of trouble dealing with. For instance, I find it interesting that since why am I forgetting his name now? I'm forgetting his name.
What?
The child who just appropriated Tongues Untied, Buchanan.
Buchanan, yeah.
It's interesting that Buchanan, it's about my computer disk erasing certain things. The Buchanan is something to erase. Right. You know, why cause my loop to overcrowd? But it's interesting that in appropriating tongues, as Buchanan did, to challenge George Bush's constituency or government, and specifically around the arts, and to point and say, well, see, this is what Bush has funded, and you know, it's all really inflated beyond belief, because Marlon wasn't given the money directly from the NEA. It came through another organization, and he had applied to the organization for money for a project yet to be determined, and based on his track record, he had been awarded $5,000, not specifically for Tongues Untied. You see, that's just how mad it has all become. But the fact that when Buchanan appropriated Tongues, out of all the footage, he decided to go for the white gay men represented in leather and chaps in the Castro. And that now, even as of this morning, with Marlon being on CBS's morning news program, the piece represented from Tongues for the American viewing audience was the one segment from the Castro with the white gay males in chaps and leather. So it's real interesting that a film about black gay experience, ultimately, by the time it reaches, which none of us knew this, but by the time it becomes involved and used and manipulated in national controversy or censorship and arts funding and all of that, that the representation of a black work is now white gay men. No, and I just find it incredibly ironic that, you know, now as the film is being manipulated as a political tool, that the manipulation isn't the beauty of black gay life, of black gay men represented in tongues and tie. It's the white gay
men dancing
with the
around.
Castro and chaps and leather. I just find it thoroughly ironic.
It is. It's amazing. To get back to what you were talking about, as far as the spectacle and that being appealing, I just want, or that being appealing to a mass audience, popular culture. I mean, obviously, the whole In Living Color thing.
A consumer audience,
right? But what immediately came to mind was Paris is Burning. Because I think in a lot of ways there, if you look at it, you have the spectacle. And then you sort of have a lot of pain. Sort of...
The flip side, there's all the charges of Jenny being an ethnographer and Jenny's background being called into question, and her being, from a family of money, and she's white, and she's a Jew, and she's a lesbian, and, all these sorts of things. And I've asked people, well, who would be the ideal person to do the film?
Right.
Okay, and I had one person say, well, someone from that community. And I said, well, then let's talk about access.
Right.
Let's talk about the real deal.
Right.
Who in that community?
Get together the video cam.
Dig it, okay?
Exactly.
Who has access in that community to a studio? The kids are lifting designer gowns so that they can walk and feel good about themselves.
Right.
Okay? So that's again the complexity of the gray. The black and the white is something else, but it's the complexity of the gray. And there's a lot of gray tone emanating from that film, even though it's a color film. There's a lot of gray in there, and that's because I think these ball walkers, the members of this ball community, represent and are living so many different intersections.
Right.
Intersections around empowering identity and race and class and sexuality. You see gender issues even. So it's too easy to dismiss or attempt to dismiss the film or its significance around Jenny's identity.
Right, exactly.
I think that's a failure even to really examine the issues that are laid out. I think that there is a clear articulation that emerges. Surely for film buffs and people who are filmmakers, there are other kinds of issues around technical things that I'm not necessarily versed in to speak about. But as someone who was able to locate himself in that particular experience, which I was able to do, which I think allowed for me to not play this role of being the dispassionate observer, but that I could see myself there, that I could identify what category I would walk in, which queen first time in drags at the ball. I mean, it made me aware of, even within what we would call then a black gay community or gay and lesbian or lesbian and gay communities of color, that there are still other communities within all of that. And that was one very important thing among many important things. I thought that the members of the community articulated themselves very well. I think, though, that the spectacle seduced maybe some audiences to just take the humor from it and not meditate and resonate on the significance of key things that were pointed out, articulations from the intersections where these men found themselves at times. I don't know what was left out, I know what's there is a very powerful statement, or there are very powerful statements, actually. That's part of that, again, that complexity.
Right.
With, I can't absolutely go with the pack, with what she's being an ethnographer, da-da-da-da-da.
Well, did you read Bruce Benderson's piece in Out Week before it went out of business?
No.
He had a really interesting, and it was the one issue I didn't buy because I didn't have the money that I regretted every single day.
I might have that issue though somewhere in my books. I think I bought it. I may not have read it.
Okay, because if you ever find it, because that was a really interesting article. That was when Paris Burning was all the rage in New York once it had opened at, I think, the Film Forum.
Right.
You know, everybody had to see it. And he talked to people like, I think he talked to Octavia.
Saint Laurent.
Right, and saying they had no idea, they were never notified that the film had opened in New York or anything like that, and all of a sudden people were coming up to them and recognizing them off the street and saying, oh, aren't you, and that they found that very uncomfortable. And I remember Octavia saying that she was very uncomfortable with it because at the time, she or he, I prefer to say she, I don't know why, didn't know of any black models. And she had a problem with that she was just going on about Paulina this, Paulina that, and now she's discovered Beverly Johnson, Naomi Campbell, people like that, and she's much more into them. But of course, and this is her being represented sort of, 2 years or however many years behind, and but just to bring someone else, because you have a lot of people who deal with things would deal with the Jenny Levinson things on those terms, with her being Jewish and a lesbian and that kind of thing. And then on the total flip side, I think you have somebody like Isaac Julian, who I think tries to be complex in everything he does and tries to deconstruct everything. But then there's a quote that really bothered me when I read it. And I have to have it right here.
Go for it.
That he gave in this interview, and he was talking, in the context, this was from Rights magazine, January, February 1992. The interview was asking about the whole deconstruction of racial identity, sexual identity going on in Young Soul Rebels. And this is the interviewer, says, do you think these notions of deconstructing are working in this type of medium being film?
Right.
And Isaac answers, in Young Soul Rebels, what I try to do is to do precisely what I said. Whether you think it works or not is up to you. I'm not going to make a defense for it. As far as I'm concerned, what I'm doing in Young Soul Rebels works for me. It works for other people that I know, like Stuart Hall, homie,
Baba.
Yeah, they misspelled his name here. Paul Gilroy, Bell Hooks. If it works for these people, then that's good enough for me. That may seem like an elitist thing to say. I'm talking about people like you who are familiar with these theories, who I respect. For me, that's good enough. And so here you have somebody that's sort of dedicated to going complexity, but in dealing with that complexity, they're isolating 4 people he mentions, and everybody else is just, who cares, And then people who are familiar with these theories, so you're bringing in the classes thing, who I respect. So what, he doesn't respect it? So I thought, just that.
Continuing defense, though, of Young Soul Rebels. That's his way. That's the defensive sort of response
because it's
to the work. Because let's face it, Young Soul Rebels has been met with uneven acceptance, if you will, an uneven sort of celebration, if you will, on both sides of the Atlantic. I'm rather in the middle, looking forward to Isaac's next production, because I feel, in one sense, that we've had a chance to look in on an artist's notebook. And not that what we looked in on, what am I doing? It's not that what we looked in and saw, that's still not right. What we're looking in at, that's what I want.
Okay.
It's still as important as any of the other work that he's done, but this is a transition in the notebook, is how I perceived of Young Soul Rebels when I viewed that.
What about some specifics, specifically?
Well, I wasn't expecting him to replicate Looking for Langston by any means.
Right.
And that's just such a stunning piece of work that gets richer every year, it seems, each viewing that I've had of it, it gets richer. Young Soul Rebels, I haven't had the same desire to go back to it. I felt like the way things were concluded was pat for me. The singing and dancing at the end, that's sort of typical in black film, it seems, or somehow black television, where I've seen us coming through complexity, and then to conclude it, we sing and dance. And so I felt that maybe the singing and dancing represented for Isaac as the artist a moment to still be meditating through, to still discover conclusion, if that's really what he's even looking for, or resolution, if that's what he's looking for. But the option of singing and dancing wasn't enough, or the symbolic purgatory of the murderer falling through the stage and on fire. I mean, there are little things. I thought perhaps the thing that appealed to me most was the class issue that struggled to gain a voice, and I don't know if it fully gained voice up against the other issues seeking voice, clamoring for voice out of this. So I took it, which I think is fair in the work of an artist. For all of us who are artists, everything isn't going to bump and grind every time it hits the street. I'm sorry. So there's going to be, points, and the most we can all hope for, if and when we go through those points, is that we can at least maintain our consistency and commitment to continuing to create. That maybe this is a notebook moment, maybe this is a transition moment for me as an artist. And it may be the next thing or the thing after that that I bring forth that will then wrap up, and explain not only to my supporters, but even for myself, most importantly, I'll understand what that moment meant in relation to where I find myself at later.
Well, his next project is
Confessions of a Snow Queen.
From
Which it should be, if that is what Isaac wants to deal with, because the question of interracialism, I think, is a significant one. That has to be dealt with. If he's ready to take it on, then he has my full support, because I think the question of interracialism, the issue of it, really needs to be handled by people who are willing to give it the attention and the thought that it requires, so that we're not looking at junk like Outlook with one of their editors and their forum on interracialism stating that he got tired of sleeping with the field hands, and so he decided to sleep with the master. And there's no mitigation, there's no interrogation, there's no qualification, there's nothing. It's just a statement out there. I can't
even believe that.
So if Isaac's ready to take it on, he has my support, because I think that cooler heads and wiser minds than those that have reigned thus far over some of the discussion around interracialism really need to be heard from, and I think most clearly from those members of our communities who are engaged in ongoing interracial relationships, romantic sexual relationships. It's one thing to have someone's support like my own, but I'm not engaged in long-term or significant romantic sexual relationships. So the best I'm offering is my humanity and an expanding consciousness around such a discussion, and an unwillingness to, be absolute that, well, this can't work, or this is, a sign of you're not being black, or you're, giving up some kind of privilege, or whatever the case may be, whatever the argument. So I'm not willing to engage in that. That's the low ground, that's the gutter ground. I'm more interested in the higher ground, and the fact that there is attraction, not only within same gender, but across racial and ethnic boundaries, etc. And I think it needs to be explored and put forth in a way that answers questions as best it can. If some can't be answered, fine. But definitely representation that will at least empower those who are involved so they're not feeling like they're always having to be put through litmus tests and whatnot, or having their identities challenged just simply because the person that they love is not, of the same ethnic or racial background. That's foolish. That's just foolish. I mean, and it's not as simple as I'm making it sound, too. There are still other...
Yeah, I mean, like the master thing you brought, I mean, they're definitely...
Self-hatred is a question that has to be interrogated, and how do you determine if that's what's going on?
Right, exactly.
If that's what's operating, and who's to determine that? The community or the individuals? You see what I'm saying?
I guess on the artistic level, I mean, what I usually think sort of great art is what I would want on interracialism right now is just something to kind of get us to be able to discuss it on that higher level. It's just kind of like we need something to kind of steer us to that level of conversation where we're not just dealing with sort of the issues that have no answers and that will never be resolved. I mean, talking about if somebody has the attitude that, somehow you're not as black if you're with a white person, there's nowhere to go with that argument.
Exactly.
You can't even get...
It's like someone saying you're going to go to hell because you're gay. Well, how the fuck do you know? What's your 1-800 number to God?
Right.
Whoever. So that's exactly. It's no way to discuss anything with an individual like that, and that's that absolute stance, and that doesn't work. I mean, that's negating all of the complexity that's there, and I'm unwilling to do that, and I'm unwilling to support any cause that furthers that sort of denial of a complexity, denial of that middle ground, that middle space between black and white, where it's just not easy to call something, this is absolutely red. Well, that's the angle of light that's hitting it right now. And someone standing somewhere else in the room may not see it as red. They might see violet.
Right.
You see, so...
Well, and this could be off the record if you want to, but could you talk a little bit about you had, I know, some kind of heated experiences concerning issues of interracialism in the last year, and it wasn't even, I think it was just like a date, or maybe it didn't even get to that stage.
We don't need to go
you don't want
that,
to,
because it's just, in a nutshell, what a number of issues emerged out of that. Number one, this whole hunger for representation, as I call it, which Isaac early on, I don't know if he necessarily coined this, but phrased it in an interview I did with him in '89 as the burden of representation. The burden of representation then for me grows out of the hunger for representation. The hunger for representation being so few images of black gay life, experience, empowerment, however one wants to call that, thus makes any time, like you were saying about the note cards, anything with black male representation is gone. It moves out of the shop.
Right, yeah.
So that you have the emergence of voices like Marlon Riggs, Isaac Julian, Melvin Dixon, Asado Saint, myself, other men as well. The burden of representation being that we've not had this kind of representation previously, so that a community then wants to impose all these things on the emerging voices, if you will, things spoken and unspoken. And what that experience did for me was made it clear to me and made me more determined that ultimately I'm going to love whoever it is I choose to love. I mean, if in one instance I'm saying to the society, go to hell, I'm going to love who I want, then within this community, within a black, lesbian, and gay community, I'm not going to be challenged around my racial identity if I should choose to love someone white or be chosen or whatever the case may be.
Right.
So that those were some of the key things that emerged in how ravenous this hunger for representation is, so that it can also make people a little crazy and cause them to lose sensible ground in terms of understanding that you can't make someone carry all of your community's voice and experience, especially if they're saying that they don't want to do that, that they want a diversity of voices there, that they want a diversity of representations there, and are trying to work to bring empowerment to other voices as well. So it was a little crazy for me to witness this, to witness people going, oh, you're our Malcolm X, and you're on. It's like, child, I never said I was anything but who I am.
Right.
So I make it a point on the lecture circuit to qualify that I'm not speaking necessarily a community's opinion as much as I'm representing my own opinion and gathered largely out of my individual experience. And if that experience then registers in a way that speaks somehow to some common understanding or common truth within a given community or the context of a particular experience, then fine. You know, if it can be utilized in that way, fine. And I'm beginning to see that that distinction is necessary because I haven't set myself up to lead an organization or, you know, lobby or this, that, or the other, but that I'm truly, you know, endeavoring to learn more about my creativity, to pressure myself for more, and that it's political anyway for me as a black person, for anyone black still in this context, to be writing, okay? So the politic isn't even superficial, it's just reality, it's there, but I don't necessarily endeavor to go after it. It's just what I'm going to do toward empowering myself is going to be political. It's no way it wouldn't be, given the context that we're in. So I think it's good to be clear about that. I think it's good to know, to remember how all this started. I want to be a writer. That's how it started. And so I don't intend to lose that as I see more and more opening up around my work and all. Even being on the circuit with a heavy speaking schedule and all, I'm remembering why it started. I'm remembering being 14 and 15 again. I'm remembering, you know, my couple of years in college. I'm remembering, you know, the nights that I created some of these things and broke down and cried afterwards because it was just such a relief to have finally gotten it out of me, to finally see it represented in some kind of language on the page, you know, long before I even think about publishing it or whether I'll perform it with a group or whether it'll be part of solo readings, but that it finally lives outside of me. It's no longer a part of me in a way that might have been giving me some pain or whatever the case may have been, but that it's there for someone else to see too. That's some of the magic of it, that when you can struggle to bring forth a representation of various experiences, you never know when it will resonate and register for someone else. Yes, you affirm it by creating it, by extracting it from your experience, but then the space you live in, the people you live around and with, and that you come into contact with, they're really the ones that affirm, you know, one way or the other.
Well, I guess, I mean, it seems to me, as far as putting yourself as being the spokesperson, in a way I can kind of see how that And maybe this next comment I'm not going to write anything. But, I mean, it seems to me, because, I mean, I'm sure it evolved just from being the editor of Brother to Brother. I mean, as far as somebody reading that, they kind of would see you as being the editor, sort of putting this all together, sort of, but under your own banner in a way. I can see how somebody could construct that, whereas when I read Brother to Brother, I see sort of
a community,
a diversity, and I see sort of different dialogue, and there are certain essays that negate each other, and there's certain things that politically don't fit with one another, and I think that's what's good about it. And I mean, I think sort of to contrast that, where you know, Asato's anthology, where to my knowledge he rewrote everybody, he did a major rewrite of everybody's poem that was
except mine.
Yeah. I just.
Except mine.
I wanted to say something to him outright so badly, but I appreciated why he was there, and I didn't want to F with that at all. I didn't want to. It just wasn't appropriate.
But at some point you should talk.
Well, at some point I will.
Because we're due to have a conversation later this month about some issues that we differ around and all. But see, there's a part of the problem. I think Brother to Brother brought it to a certain kind of head. But there was a momentum there already. There was already a history in my experience of being in certain places at certain times, and the time delivering then a certain kind of exposure in terms of the work that I've been doing. So, I mean, I'm hungry to get back into performance. I'm going to have to. I miss being on a stage with voices as opposed to being on the stage with myself, which I love being on the stage with just myself, but you know, it's nothing like the music that emerges when you're working in a choral format with other poets or other performance artists, other musicians. And so I'm hungry for that, I really am, and I can see that hunger manifesting itself in the kinds of presentations I'm giving of some of the work I'm sharing now, how I'm putting still more of myself into it, living it more, even though the pieces may be 3 or 4 years old in some instances. But there was a momentum already, so Brother to Brother and Tongues and Tide and Looking for Langston, all 3 of those things then just collectively have added, you know, more to the persona, if you will. And so now there's ceremonies, which seems to be concluding a particular cycle. I think it's interesting that it's coming out in the 5th year of my 7-year cycles, because I'll be 35 next week, or this week actually.
When's your birthday?
The 16th. And so they say things move in cycles, right? 7-year cycles. And so this is my 35th year, and feeling underneath that there is a change bigger than all of this that's coming for me. A change in sensibility, I think, a deepening in some ways, an understanding about what things I really want to be talking about and concerned with, knowing that, like the novel I'm working on, Standing in the Gap is what it's called.
I want you to talk about that.
Well, primarily what I'm trying to do is achieve a work wherein the white other isn't privileged. In other words, the dialogue, the interaction, the experience of the novel is succinctly and simply around Black lives, period. And the reason for that, there are models. There's one particular model that I'm thinking of that's been sort of leading me along. It's Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God. Or even looking at something like Daughters of the Dust.
I saw that, by the way.
And what I'm becoming more convinced of is that, okay, there's been enough discourse and dialogue, as far as I'm concerned, around racism. I'm more interested in what happens when we begin to talk to each other. when we don't privilege white voices, white experience, but that we deal with each other as black people. And so I'm enjoying thus the creating of this. I sort of know where it's going, but I'm letting it still take me along, you know what I'm saying, as opposed to me trying to take it somewhere.
Are you suggesting a way that by speaking of racism that is in some sort of way privileging a white voice?
I'm looking at classic point. Let's look at the new detective novel, black detective novel. And I just saw the ad last night in American Visions. I'd heard about this fellow's book, but I hadn't read it yet. I looked at the ad in American Visions, and the white woman is center on the cover, blonde, shapely, voluptuous, and all around her are these little tiny representations of black characters from the novel. Another example of what I'm getting at, Spike Lee's Jungle Fever, that travesty around interracialism, okay? The black women, continuing a long line of what Spike Lee thinks of black women as they're represented, from black woman as hot mattress and she's gotta have it, now all the way through School Days and Mo Better Blues, etc. Now we are here at Jungle Fever, and the black woman is this screaming, shrill, violent representation. She's never clear thinking in terms of the way she's represented. She's always reacting. She's always, if you will, if she's not being the quote bitch, she's a half step away from being such. It's the white woman whose character is given depth and dimension. You see the white woman struggling with her home environment. You see her struggling with the class issue that's there, and her being a subordinate to Wesley Snipes' character. You see her go through this heart-wrenching scene with her brother and her brothers and fathers being violent. So you get a sense that she's also having to endure a certain sort of subjugation and domination and God knows whatever else in her home from these white males. You get all of this about these white women.
Yeah, but not about,
Okay? So the film should have been called Miss Ann's Awful Mistake Falling in Love with a Buck. You know, something along that line. That would have been more realistic.
Yeah, that's true.
And so I'm like, well, and then you look at a film like Daughters of the Dust, which is just the text is meta-narrative. Maybe it's meta-narrative, okay? It's fierce. It's like I haven't seen black people like this, I think maybe ever in my life.
Yeah.
Ever in my life, and there's no one right there, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I'm not saying that it still isn't important to create those works, but there's so few works where we're just dealing with each other and looking at each other, and we're, you know, the objects of one another's gaze, if you will. We're the subjects of one another's gaze, if you will. It's so rare.
That's true.
And so I think that that's what's not only just refreshing about Daughters of the Dust, but it's fierce.
Right.
It's just fierce, and one scene of that is not enough. And it's a film that I think is, you know, surely it's got classic written all over it.
Yeah.
It's doing things now that we can't even imagine. Well, that's what I meant about focusing in on ourselves, that we become the subjects to one another, that we feel one another's gaze. That's the thing that I think is long overdue for us. I think there's already wonderful texts from all kinds of thinkers, all kinds of witnesses, all kinds of testimony around racism, around constructing anti-racist stances, around issues, around solutions. How can we resolve some of this? where do we begin to work at resolving it? All, I think that wonderful minds, energies, hearts, and souls have already been spent. And so when I began working on this novel, Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God came to mind, just in terms of, can I work a story where there is no white interaction, other than maybe it's passing, but that I am not faced with bringing forth a character and having to develop him or her. And so far it's working out that I'm able to do that, which I don't think is a racist act at all. It just gives me more room, more pages to explore our beauty and complexity, our ugliness, all of the things that we are.
Yeah, just like the way Isaac Julian seems to have so many problems with the statement, black men loving black men is a revolutionary act, and that type of thing. I mean, that still rings true for me, because if we're out there killing each other on the streets, daily, and living in D.C., I mean, and stuff like that, and you can't even walk up to somebody and say hi without somebody giving you something, like it's a challenge, and it seems like, I mean, that's what we need, and whether it's relevant or not in the long run, or whether that's ultimately where we should be going, I mean, it just seems like right now it's like we need something like that more than ever.
Yeah, because we're in crises. We're well past crises even, and that's the problem I had. See, I think Isaac may be defensive right now around young soul rebels, but I think, again, if he has the courage to go for exploring interracialism, then I want him to do that. Work from your experiences, if they're the most powerful things that we can bring forth. If that's where we bear our most witness, then I say bring it forth, and bring it forth in all the truth and clarity that you can bear. But to attack something like black men loving black men, I think that that's shooting at the wrong thing. That black men loving black men is a very necessary statement, and it's a statement that's vertical, that you have to impose a horizontal reading upon it, and you know what I mean. In other words, that you have to read it sexually. You have to impose it upon it. You have to impose upon it the idea that it's black men fucking black men. That's not what the statement said. It said loving, and ideally, and surely most functionally for us as black males right now, one of the things we need is to be able to love each other vertically, to be able to deal in a way that supports, that nurtures, that empowers, and it's possible, but it's not going to be possible attacking these sentiments when they occur and when they have the power to move us forward, which I think black men loving black men does have that power. And that just because one is, again, in an interracial relationship, black men loving black men doesn't exclude that.
But I guess, well, I'm glad you kind of brought up the defensive thing about Isaac, because I guess I've been bothered by a lot of things that he said lately.
I think it's defensive, and I think it's fair to level it in that way. And again, it's not a disparaging comment. It's not at all to say, the brother is, that. No, it's not a trashing comment at all. It's just an assessment of my seeing him in public when Young Soul Rebel was presented at the University of Penn, and the Q&A that we engaged in, we the audience, with Isaac, and his response to some of the questions. Our subsequent talk afterwards, after the screening, briefly, wherein I told him, you have my support, but this just seems like we're peeking in your workbook right now. This doesn't feel finished.
You said that from the movie?
Yeah, but I feel like we have to be real with each other.
That's true, we do.
To the extent that, again, that we're not trashing anything, but that we're really trying to give substantive commentary so that the artist, he or she, can continue to move forward. And I knew that some of the realm of the questioning could have gotten rough at any moment from some of the questioners. What's interesting for me, though, is that the straight, black, risking redundancy, heterosexual, supposedly, intellectual and pseudo-intellectual community that has run to embrace, along with the white critics, young soul rebels. It's an embrace that I think has come late. They needed to be embracing Isaac when he was out there with Looking for Langston. That's when, so you're watching, I feel, black people catch on a little late. That Isaac is, in many ways, like Marlon, representing aspects of genius in terms of being able to fuse certain things, and that they're young men. You know, it's not like these are men that are 40 or 50, but they're now grappling issues that we will be dealing with and meditating over and struggling around for the rest of our lives. So that Isaac needed the black heterosexual support when Looking for Langston was being trashed. You see what I'm saying? And where was it? It was largely silent. So this sort of has, so that the black critics I read celebrating young soul rebels, I read their critiques, and then I say young soul rebels, and I was like, child, there's a world of difference between what I read on the page and what I've seen on the screen. And it's not me. You know, I may not be into, you know, film language and all of this, but dear. Come on, let's talk, because some of the critics are talking about how hot the sex scenes were. When I saw the sex scenes, I said, please. Please. You don't have to show me dick going into anything, but there's got to be a more creative way to represent this that makes more heat come up than, you know, I didn't even feel like fanning myself. And from the written critiques I had read, I was expecting, you know, just...
We're looking for Langston, I feel, is very sort of deep.
Yes. Well, see, that's what I'm saying. He needed this embrace that he's getting from the, quote, cultural critics and theorists, the black ones, around Looking for Langston. Okay? When George Bass and the Hughes estate were giving him trouble, when they took him to hell and had those alterations made for the American version, where were your bell hooks, your homie bobbers, your Houston Bakers? You see what I'm saying?
She did write that one article that,
Okay, let's pull Bell out of that. You're right, let me not. You know, you start calling names and you just forget. But you're right. She even called my name in that piece, so I should have. But do you get my drift?
I know that.
You know, when he was under the gun, where were they to pressure on his behalf in some way on this side?
Well, I know.
So that the estate wouldn't have taken them, because there was no call for them to basically, I feel, destroy that film. Is what they did by adding more of my work. It's destroyed that film. It's not the original meditation. It's fierce. Because you need Hughes's voice in there. And so that's why I'm saying this support, these brilliant minds, many of them, if you will. He needed that support for Looking for Langston, so that he wouldn't have had to go through. It would have been, I think, at least clearer. Where his support was coming from, if it was going to come at all. So I feel like, you know, a day later,
but
they're here.
I mean,
because the questions that our present black cultural critics didn't really contend with were some of the very things that were even playing out in Looking for Langston. And I think the most glaring question of all, which was basically emerged because of the Hughes estate's reaction to Langston, was, well, then who has access to black cultural history, to black history, period? Who are the police at the gates, at the vaults, you know, at the safe deposit boxes? And how are we to negotiate with them, or do we just wait till they die? And in some instances, there's no point in waiting for them to die as opposed to trying to negotiate, but none of that even emerged clearly enough for me. I mean, and some of that should even be being discussed now. So So it's a day later, a dime short, but they're here.
Yeah.
So let's welcome them into our kingdom, our queendom.
What was that?
I was saying that I've been creating to represent things that I've been hungering for in terms of affirmation, and that that's probably been one of the primary impulses around what I've created, that it hasn't been there, that when I, read through the various texts, African American literature, I didn't see black gay sexuality or experience or romance being represented. And if we were represented, we were always these dysfunctional characters, or we were somehow this momentary spectacle in someone's novel or someone's critical assessments, but never as the people I see us as being. And it's not like we're necessarily divine people. We're like every other person in many respects, having issues and situations to contend with in our lives. But I was hungry for a poem that would represent the experience of being in a bookshop, like Les Salon, which was used in Looking for Langston, or when Ronald Gibson was murdered in Washington, and I wrote Homicide. That was a deliberate act I never knew him, but I thought the circumstances of his death were tragic. They found his body along the side of North Capitol. He'd been shot several times and dumped in full drag and all. And who was going to remember him other than, the local gay paper? So that I felt I needed to represent him, to imagine what it must have been like, which has been incredible with some of the work, the imagining myself there, the projection of self into the experience, and not knowing what kind of power I was playing with, not playing with, but tapping into, when I would allow myself to disappear and allow the voice or voices of another experience outside of my own to then take over. But it's always been a need to represent what isn't there, to put into place what I haven't seen, what hasn't been there to move me, and thus, in a second-hand sort of way, then I find that other people have been moved as well.
Right.
Yeah, which is really weird in some instances, but it is all about basically satisfying myself. So right now I'm brimming. The cup keeps tilting a little of its liquid out, and I have a couple of more months before I will really have my time to myself again. In the interim, I've written a couple of poems, short poems, all of them, which is in keeping with the kind of schedule I have right now.
Right.
I've been sort of reluctant to even want to write until I'm still, because I don't want to start up and then I can't stop.
Yeah.
And then I have this, hellacious schedule to look at.
Right.
And then it'll be a thing of, well, which is more important to me? And more than likely making the time somehow, even if it would mean excusing myself, from a gig or whatever.
Right.
And I just don't want to tempt that. So,
especially with the book,
yeah, so I've just got to, see it through to its end and not be a difficult artist and, start canceling things. No, I will not be there. I'm working on what may be my masterpiece, excuse me.
I know a theme that seems to run through quite a few, I think, elaborate on it. I really should have, it's in a page number, so let me just...
I know, isn't it incredible that they got 0 zeros all the way through?
Yeah, it's really...
Is that your copy to keep?
Yeah.
Well, then I'll sign it for you, because
now.
it's only a few people who have that.
But I'll be getting... Well, okay, but I definitely...
But I've been deliberately signing the green ones.
Oh, really?
just because it adds another dimension.
Okay,
You know what I'm
definitely,
saying?
yeah.
It's uncorrected, all of that.
Right.
Because, like, instructions for an old black faggot has been pulled.
Why?
I couldn't,
I was just about to read from it. What?
I couldn't deal with, it's such a strong piece,
Uh-huh.
that I couldn't deal with it being in the book just yet.
Really? I think it's such a powerful piece.
Yeah, you acted right on that, didn't I? Yes, I did, because when you talk about integrity and all, I know who the piece is for.
Oh.
He will likely know who it's for by the initials. I think there's a time and place for me to reckon with the particular individual that the poem is leveled at, and I didn't think that ceremonies was the right time and place. And so, because I didn't want the book to be carrying venom, not unnecessary venom, but I didn't want it to be carrying a certain something that Instructions for an Old Black Faggot then sets off, which is different from the way I approach dealing with adversaries, if you will, coming through. Miss Emily's grandson won't hush his mouth, and I deal with Edmund White and Barbara Nicholson and various conflicts, you know, that have emerged around my work. This Instructions for an Old Black Faggot isn't quite like Miss Emily's grandson won't hush his mouth. Instructions for an Old Black Faggot is, even when I place myself in the poem, which I did deliberately so that I could remind myself, you see, of how important this lesson is, even as I'm getting older, that you don't use certain things about yourself for seduction. You don't misrepresent the good you have to offer or give at any given time by seeking the gain or compensation or, you know, something physical in exchange for that. That's a model that I would say the dominant culture likes to exercise, a strategy it likes to use. And I think we have to be bigger than dominant culture strategies, if you will, behavior, if you will. We have to sort of press ourselves for a bit more integrity sometimes. Yeah, it could be very easy to seduce, you know, young people back and forth across the country. But no, that's not what I'm after. I don't want it to be said, oh, well, I had Essex Hemphill. I prefer to say I learned something from him. Even if you learned it after you had it. But you know what I mean. I'm looking for the higher ground.
Testing 1, 2, 3 is because of the headphones. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3.
That's what I was looking for. The register. Okay. We'll unplug the headset. Testing.
Testing.
See, that's what we should have been having, a meter reading.
Is that going to be too loud, though? Because it seems like it's going all the way to the red.
That's what I'm trying to tilt it down. Testing. 1, 2, 3.
Testing.
Okay, do it.
Testing.
Well, I think it's going to just do that. I've got it down on 3.
I think 3 is probably good.
Yeah.
Testing, because I'm probably going to lean back like this. And right.
Yeah, it's picking you up.
Yeah, let me get closer now.
How's that?
I think that's good. Well,
Okay.
you think
Testing! Yeah, it's picking up.
Stir up just a little bit.
Okay. I think we got the speed centered, which is normal speed, so it should be fine.
Okay, so let's talk Essex Hemphill interview, tape 2, April the 12th, 1992, Sunday afternoon, 6:30. Moving into the evening. Begin to discuss interview tape specifically for The Advocate, for a feature piece for The Advocate. Okay, we'll talk about how did you get started as a poet?
I've been writing since I was 14. I was given encouragement coming through junior high and high school by various of my English teachers. They took an interest in through my essays, and things that were on my mind and in my writing skills, so that I was given encouragement. I was also involved before leaving to attend University of Maryland with a group in Washington called Pinpoints. And at that point, we would meet at different of our homes and discuss our new work, share it with the group, and would later go on to do public readings of the work, which was very exciting for me in that I was still in high school. When I hit college, I participated in poetry readings on campus. I stayed at University of Maryland for like a year. Then I went to university, their evening program, and then I attended ultimately UDC, and then finally I just, left it all in the dust and have been working as a writer. Throughout all of that, I've always known that I wanted to be, or that I am, finally, a writer. And so when I left school, it was the idea that it was too confining for the curiosity I had, and around the things I wanted to create, I felt I needed to be out in the world as opposed to being on a campus. And I developed, even then, support for my work, a following for the poems I was writing then. Nothing at that point in my freshman year, nothing was overtly gay. I wouldn't really begin to write overtly gay poetry. That wouldn't happen until I hit my early 20s, 22, 23, in my first relationship. Okay. And so within the relationship, I found a certain kind of empowerment, a certain kind of affirmation that allowed me to then make it manifest in my work, which was really exciting for me. I could tell, again, that my consciousness was expanding from the point of having been groomed in a certain way around black nationalist politics and culture. My emerging gay sensibility was then in conflict with that at times. The give and take, what do I keep, what do I let go of, what is me, what is propaganda from either side of the equation, be it my gay side or my black side, having to ferret all of that out. When I published Earth Life in 1985, prior to that I had published two smaller single poem works that were called Plums and Diamonds was in the Kitty, and they were little 5.5. No, they weren't even 5.5. They were, they were 5.5 by 4.25 is the size, and they were packaged in little boxes, gold or white, and they were collector's pieces basically. So when I hit to self-publishing Earth Life, it was because I knew there was an audience for my work, and I was becoming frustrated with the difficulty in finding a publisher for just a little collection of poems. So I decided out of my own pocket that I would do Earth Life, and I titled it Earth Life because I was also resonating off of and had responded very strongly to Pablo Neruda's work, and specifically Residence on Earth, Residencia en la Tierra. And the reason that I selected Earth Life is sort of paid homage in a way to Neruda and his sensibility, which is just incredible. I think he's probably one of the 20th century's finest poets. I love the merging of the personal and the political, and how that manifests in his work. And so for me, there was a lot to be learned, and I still, to this day, reference Residence on Earth. I have it there on the shelf, and when I feel like particularly stimulating myself, I go back and I reread certain of the poems that I fell in love with from Residence on Earth and from Fully Empowered. But residence on Earth, Earth life. That was,
Right.
that was my sort of indirect homage to him.
Well, what were you doing at the time? Where were you working at the time?
I worked primarily after working at the Washington Post first in advertising part-time while I was in school, and then moving into the newsroom and working as a copy aide. From that point forward, I would then wind up working largely in graphics and typography. So coming through 84, 85, 86, I was probably in corporate life, the utility company there in Washington, the electric company. I left there and joined with a printing firm, wound up being head of the typography department, then wound up becoming head of typography and graphics, which, mind you, I had not trained for the graphics end, so my graphics instincts were just that, instincts, but they won customers. So, but in that experience, I learned the very necessary things about paper selection, positioning things, how to make a product look good, which was half the battle anyway, to not come out with something that looked tacky, but to really put, some effort into it. So I worked with an artist, Malik Edwards in Washington, for the cover of Earth Life, and I worked with Sharon Farmer for the cover of Conditions. Then I worked with Daniel Sema for the cover of the second printing of Earth Life, which at that point bore my representation, just as Conditions did the same as well. Sharon and Daniel are both photographers. Malik is pen and ink artist. In any event, I appreciated their visions, and I felt that, their craft, their talent, their artistry spoke to some of the effort I was engaged in the self-publishing venture. And in retrospect, I see that it was really important for me to have endeavored to bring forth my own work. One thing that immediately happened is that I resisted the notion that this is vanity publishing, which I see that as a strategy to keep communities that are traditionally disempowered from even considering bringing forth and controlling their own work and their own representation, for the seduction of, well, you want to make it into the canon, don't you? You want the academy, and it's like, well, what's the academy and what's the canon? Oftentimes it's these dry, brittle, fossilized people who, have very little to offer in terms of work that rejuvenates, work that presses the limit, work that goes the edge, that tries to be a work that lives, that's, not just on the page, but that lives and resonates in people's lives. And I felt my work, I see that is where my work differs a lot of times, but it was an act of subversion that I really appreciated undertaking, because it empowered me in a way. It empowered me definitely from Earth Life to do Conditions. And it empowered me to go from doing 12 poems to 24 poems. It made me feel comfortable in terms of creating Conditions with the idea of negating my titles and just setting up Conditions as a cycle of poems running 1 through 24, because I wanted the mood of the body of the 24 to hit you under Conditions, as opposed to each title, like Ceremonies is set up with the titles, including my restoring the titles to the work that appeared in Conditions, just because it would make it easier, I thought, for researchers and whatnot to identify what's what from where.
So you're already setting yourself up. I was thinking, but you're talking about the canon, and in a sense, with Ceremonies, definitely, if not already with Brother to Brother, I mean, you are part of a canon now.
Oh, I know.
But
you still resist that. You still resist that,
But how does that feel, being a part
I don't know
of
if
the
it's a feeling as much as, it's a fact of many things. It's a fact of cumulative things, too. And it's not over. That's the thing. I can sometimes barely imagine what still waits for me. I know that I'm anxious to get back to my writing in the very serious way that I make myself write and create. Right now, in between the trips, I've just been able to barely catch my breath you know, keep my domestic life somewhat running, and then I'm back on the road again. And it's a bit of a trade-off right now. You're building new audience, you're having your ideas challenged, you're promoting various works, various ideologies, most of them personal, most of it personal.
Right.
But they say the personal is political, and it is. It really is.
It's interesting because at Outright, you know, when you were speaking about the Joseph Beam Award and everything like that, I couldn't help thinking that at some point, you know, years down the line, whether it's that some people will probably be in a room very much the same thing, talking about award in your name. And I wondered if that at all came to you at the time, if you...
Well, you know, it's interesting because there's a dilemma for me about awards. The way that I put it to the blacks represented in the audience was, are we ready for something to celebrate and nurture us? Something that we create for those purposes. And that momentary silence was deafening. Okay?
Yeah.
It was really deafening.
It
And I
really
was
was.
like, well, maybe this question's been asked too soon. Maybe we're 5 years in, you know, ahead of where the community is at. So I asked it again. And, you know, because I said, well, maybe they didn't hear me right. But what I realized is the question then negated any intent that anyone may have had upon making this a black-white, let's bash the white boys, see they done it to us again issue. And it put it squarely in our court. You know, that's my whole point about, you know, no longer centering the other represented by the white male, but now centering ourselves, black people. You know, so that's why it was interesting. I'll never forget that silence.
Yeah, I remember actually. It was very.
It was deafening. It was definitely there was. It had a seat in the room like everybody else was there, and it made its presence known. And I said, okay, we'll acknowledge it, but then we're gonna ask the question again. And slowly, people began to.
Well, yeah, it's also such a. And I think that is it. I think people came in with the mood to sort of bash in a way, and
we robbed that whole moment of that.
And all of a sudden it was like thrown back, and it really did. It was a powerful moment, if nothing else, of just sort of collectively seeing people sort of take responsibility and to take a weight, and that's very interesting.
So, in terms of just moving through things, the awards for me. It's like, okay, Brother to Brother's been nominated for like 2 different awards so far. And, some people were concerned, well, you're going to jeopardize the chances of the book if you, run this kind of strategy at Outright. And it's like, I'm not in this for awards either. If the book gets an award, fine. If it doesn't, fine. The book is doing its work.
Right.
That's what's important. And see, that's what I mean about even how I'm moving through these notions of celebrity or whatnot. To me, it's not celebrity, it's work. And so this is a day off for me, and Monday will be a day off, and Tuesday will be part of a day off. I'll be working through all those days, but effectively, these are my 3 days off, and then I'm on the road again for the next 6 days. So that I don't see celebrity, I don't see limousines, I don't have an entourage of boys, looking after me, and girls answering my phone and mail and things like that. No, it's me. I am, so I am. And so,
I think ceremonies, at least for me, I can't say that it seemed to be a more personal work, because I think all of your work is very personal, but I think in having it all together, you get more of a personal sense than you necessarily do from reading. I mean, Brother to Brother, most of your poems were sort of, fragmented between the other things, so, so you kind of, I didn't mean to say fragmented, because that has a negative connotation, but
mixed, I understand.
Right, but you lose a sense of individuality in a sense by being in sort of collective, and that's why I think Ceremonies comes across as sort of a very personal kind of statement. And will that change your focus at all in, going out now behind this book? And since it does sort of have a different thing, and it seems like people will be sort of responding a lot differently to this.
Me,
yeah, and to you.
A collective. I hear you.
And they will be responding, I think, more to you rather than who they necessarily. It's hard in Brother to Brother to get an identity of who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think in ceremonies you do sort of come to a sense, or your own sense of who you think Essex Hemphill is.
Mm-hmm.
So, how is that? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, it's likely that it'll be one more dimension in the Q&As that follow my programs now. It means that I have more of myself out there now. It's so interesting that in terms of having a public life, a very open public life for the most part, that behind that I'm then able to construct a certain amount of privacy. There is some privacy that I do cling to because I just need a place to recharge, regroup, regain focus. So you don't give up everything, but I think some of my effort, if I had to today assess what I've done up to this point, I'm about to hit 35, I'm very proud that I represent the possibility for Black gay men who desire to write and to create, that the possibility does exist, that you may even be able to do it full time, that in order to do that, it requires, however, sacrifice of certain things, a commitment that's just unyielding, but not one that's inflexible, just unyielding. In other words, that you're never doubting that you are on the right path with your work. I'm very proud to represent love between Black men can be more than horizontal, and that's clearly represented in Brother to Brother. That's why whether or not it gets an award is irrelevant. Whether or not it's remembered by the people we would think of as being important, and thus their memories important, it doesn't matter. The people who need Brother to Brother are getting it.
Right.
Another generation coming along will have it. They'll have In the Life also, and they'll have the many other things that'll be coming forth and have come forth from our community. So that's been the important work. That's the work to focus on, and I'm proud to be represented around those things. I don't know,
Let me just flip for a second. It's amazing they don't have the page numbers here, but they actually
have a
paginate.
I know. But it's because, I know why, because the table of contents is so final. And I've made I have been a terror when I've had, not too much, but when I've had the space to make changes, I have made them, But my editor, Peter, is excellent. I just really, I really dig this man. I think he's been incredibly supportive. He's been very patient with me, because you can imagine that with me being on the road like this, there has been nothing but hell. I'm right now in hell with the publicist. I know she must be through with me.
Right.
She called me last Monday. Here we are now coming to the second Monday, and I'm just about to get back to her. In fact, I think I'm really 2 weeks behind talking with her about really important things, but it's just, the road schedule I'm on now has nothing to do with ceremonies.
Right.
It's Brother to Brother, and then Tongues and Tie.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? So adding ceremonies to the mix is surely going to make it almost hellacious in some ways, but I've learned a lot of things out of this last year about being on the road. I've learned a lot of things being on the road, things that'll show up in how I negotiate come the fall for visiting campuses. And I'm thinking maybe by next spring I will just be off the road for, from January through until the next fall.
Yeah, you really should.
So that, because I don't want to wear it out. I don't want to seem like I'm trying to crowd and hog the, field of vision and whatnot. And there's just other work I want to be doing.
Yeah.
I do feel, though, that hitting 35, as I am with the support of my family, which has been a very difficult thing at times, but a very necessary work to be doing, to have their love and their support, that they're equally as excited as I am about, this book, ceremonies, even though I know there are things in there that will unnerve them, but that's just the way it is. So hitting 35, I'm wondering, well, where will I go now? The novel promises so much,
right,
and I'm looking forward to moving through to its conclusion, and believing that it will make it onto the shelves. That I'm working with the same integrity that I always work with, and trying to give my best, and asking difficult questions, and not having always an answer, and creating characters that continue to become more complex, and yet register real. There's a lot yet to be done, but I'm thankful for the things I represent now. Most importantly, that we can love each other vertically, and that we can be there for each other vertically. And that's one of the most important lessons I hope will be taken away from my representation at the end of the day. But see, you may not know that I'm HIV positive also.
Well, see, I didn't until...
when did you find out?
Well, I didn't until you said it in... at Outright,
because
at the thing, and it really disturbed me.
I think the whole country must know.
Yeah.
Because it's...
But Michael LaSalle told me that you said something about it at the first Outright.
No, I didn't.
You just told him or something? Or?
I might have told a few people personally.
Okay.
Then, but I did in my public talk. No,
oh, okay, because he told me that was...
It's only in the last year that I have been, representing that aspect of my life as well publicly. Which, my take on it is so different than most people's. I'm wondering, maybe I'm just crazed, but I don't under or overprivilege it, and I'm not interested in a pity party. And I've been dealing with it largely in the way that I deal with other things that I confront as a black male. So I see it as just one more of those things, though it requires a different sort of attention. And, I don't know if I'm going to be here the next, 3 months or whatever. I don't really worry about that. The impact of knowing has worked in this way, that I try to give my best, just my very best, no matter what it takes out of me. Because this is not how it's going to be for every black gay man. And I don't want my representation of being HIV positive to be seen as something that, okay, I don't want to come forth and deal with this life because, here was this man, he was talented and all of this, and, now he's HIV. But no, it's one more thing that you have to contend with. And if you believe in yourself fiercely enough, then you'll find a way to deal also with that and still get your work done. Marlon and I even had a long talk because within my circle of personal friends, there is, well, how are you taking care of yourself, and what things are you doing or what aren't you doing? And I've always felt that each of us has to individually determine what's going to work for him or her.
Right.
And that beyond that, beyond, let's say, really showing no care or concern, which has not been my strategy at all, then I think we have to respect how individuals choose to care for themselves. And so that was a little bit of an issue back in the summer while I was out on the West Coast. In fact, I haven't had time to fully meditate on many of the things, representing not only black male, black gay, literary identity, but then also health representation, which is emerging. So and I guess it's because I long ago tore down all those closet doors, so there's really no place to really hide anything. It was good that I had come out to my family, because then when I revisited to discuss then the issue of my health, again the support was there. Concern, surely, a great deal of it, but the support nonetheless, and that wouldn't have been there if I had not, I think, been investing my time and my effort over the years into being a part of my family, and bringing my issues to the family, like everybody else brings an issue or issues.
Right.
These are my issues. So the summer bodes a great deal of writing. I just feel it. And probably in a couple of genres, or several I should say, surely maybe seeing myself completing the full first draft of the novel. Also, I'm anticipating poetry and essays, and probably a lot of essays, because some of the things that are on my mind, some of the things I want to comment on, I feel already that the form for some of the discussion that I want to have will be essay. I like that format, but then I'm also looking at it in terms of, well, what can I do to subvert that form a little bit, because I want not to just write in the voice of an essayist, but I want my poetic voice there as well. I'm clear about knowing that's what I want when I pen my next essays. So maybe it'll be a two-voiced piece, you know. Maybe I'll move between poetry and the prose of essay, if you will, or we'll see. All I know is that I see some things I want to do now within the context of writing essays for some of the things I want to write about, so that their impact is more fully realized on the page. So that's what the summer bodes. Day by day, I'm thankful to be alive. I'm very thankful to be alive. I can't say more so now that I know what my health status is, because there's been so much that's been so incredible to live to see, living to see, looking for Langston, living to see tongues untied, living to see brother to brother, living to see ceremonies, and living to yet see some of the things that will bear fruit over the course of the next year. Some of the projects I still want to initiate that are still only verbal and drawing their own sorts of energy, like the narratives from older black gay men.
Yeah, what's happening with that?
That's just in limbo right now, you know.
Have you collected many of them, or?
Haven't been able to collect any yet, just simply because of the schedule.
Right.
Simply because of that, and for no other reason. So, I think I'm handling it. If there's any space in my life that I would like to see more fulfilled, it may be the romantic aspects, but that's a difficult thing. Not because I'm HIV positive, but because of the traveling. I get my fair share of little love notes still. But right now it's me and my cat and this work, and I love the work that I'm doing, and I'm thankful, and I know that it's not a rarity. I'm not tied to university. I'm with me, and thus I represent the possibility of possibilities for other black gay men, surely. And that's a small thing in one way, but it's a big thing in another, because it means that, someone else and others coming along can consider such a life possible, and can consider that it can be fulfilling. Even its romantic side. I know what's slowing up romance on my side of the equation. So I guess that maybe where Joe and I differed, because even obtaining public love and respect.
Did you know I was about to read that part?
And even though I didn't, even knowing that, I go through my bouts of loneliness and whatnot, that as some of my friends have said, you're just so incredibly self-sufficient, and I used to be offended by that, but I know what they mean, and I know that they don't mean it negatively, that I'm fortunate to be able to enjoy my own company. I can make myself work, or I can really enjoy working alone or in groups. But that my time, I'm not sitting back with the blues. I have the blues every now and then, but it's not like the ongoing nagging at everything that I do. And I still believe that my friends based in Washington, that those relationships have been so important all the way through this. The invaluable feedback from Wason or Larry or Michelle or any of my friends, or Brenda Files, people who performed my work or read my work and commented on it. Ceremonies is not, even though it represents me now, it's still very much a community's project, a smaller community, community that I would call extended family and family, but a community nonetheless. People who would take the time when I, would bust through the door. I got these new poems. Can you read them? And
Right.
like, will you read this in public with me? That's invaluable.
Yeah.
That's what has gone into making me who I am, and I remember that even more as I move through the world now. I just and I don't forget it. I don't ever want to forget it. I just don't. It's then forgetting home in some kinds of ways, and I'm not about trying to do that. Some people feel they have to estrange themselves, and that's not it. My concern now is how to lift more of the people that have helped me along in the things that they're endeavoring to do. So that's my concern, and I don't even feel like I've hit my success yet.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? But there's access to things that I have now, and it's about sharing those things, and I've been trying to do that as much as possible, and doing it without any fanfare, doing it without looking for any applause or any awards. You see what I'm saying? So when it comes to that award controversy, I have a specific thing in mind, surely and ultimately the empowerment of emerging lesbian and gay writers and established lesbian and gay writers being given due through those awards. And if they're going to be set up in the name of Joseph Beam or set up in the name of Joseph Beam and Pat Parker, then those aspects of their identity, very primary aspects of their identities, needs to be represented in an award bearing their name. And if not in their name, we need awards like that, period, to encourage and empower more of the voice that we need to have, coming forth from our communities. So I'm indifferent about awards when it comes to me personally, and even when it comes to, like I said, brother to brother is doing it's fiercely doing its work. I didn't know it was going to do all that it's doing. I didn't know that it would so immediately wind up in people's classrooms. I didn't know that, it would have this mileage around it. I didn't know it was going to cross over and pick up reviews in the Washington Post and in the Inquirer and Z Magazine and the Village Voice. Territory that in the life, strove to tap into, but just at that point in history couldn't hit. So most of my agenda around Brother to Brother has been accomplished. And I had a very simple agenda after, working for the empowerment of black gay men, or at least our representation being more diverse than we had previously seen it represented and in the life. And I think that occurs largely with that last section of the book, where we began to deal with the intellectual musings and concerns of black gay men. There was nothing like that previously, and it's only, mind you, a slight jarring. The door is only slightly ajar. Once that door is fully thrown open, which will surely show up in later work. You see what I'm saying? All my agendas were accomplished, all of them, with the exception that the men did not get paid, so this is the last anthology that I would do where the contributors are not getting monetary compensation. It's the last one. So, and I know I want to do another anthology. I know I'd like to do an anthology of short fiction by Black gay men, and that's, you know, going to take me just a little while longer to work that through, and that'll likely be easier to put into motion than some of the other things I want to do, but it's nonetheless what I would like to work on and be represented around. So, you know, I think it was a little different only in the personalities of Joseph and I, that he really did need more than a public love, and in a quantity greater than my own need, which isn't to say that there was anything wrong. You see what I'm saying? But public love just wasn't enough. I'm able to live off public love, if you will, to a certain extent. And, you know, I have a few people close to me that give me other sorts of nurturing that I need. But in terms of a whole romantic sexual relationship, I don't have one just yet. And that would be a wonderful thing to have. But if it's not for now, I'm not going to cry about it. Do you see? That's really the thing. Well, and some
you have plenty
of
of jazz records.
Yeah. Thank you. I got a bunch of things I could do, you know. So that's it, you know. I don't know if I tapped into the things.
No, I think you definitely did. I think we probably have what we need.
We spent an afternoon to get there, but it's been a wonderful afternoon.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Not at all. I want you and Seth both to come back and visit.
Okay, definitely.
Because this I miss this. This is the one thing about living in Philadelphia that I haven't established this sort of network, and it's again because I'm in and out of here so much. Wherein at the point that if I was living in Washington, this would be happening, there would already be history there. But here, it's hard to make a history when you're in and out of a place.
Right.
So that Cheryl Dunye, Robert Reed Farr, Anthony Starkdale, Robert's getting ready to move back to New York in August. Cheryl and I are both traveling and, you know, trying to work together, but there is a comfort there that I'm gaining from her friendship and being able to witness her relationship, and you know what I'm saying? It's ways that you know how to move through without letting the things that could really cause you to be dysfunctional have their day.
Right.
Because there have been moments when I felt like, well, this is it, folks. Now I'm gonna, you know, go off to some remote part of the country and, you know, just tend to a little garden and, you know, maybe work, go back to graphics and typography or something like that. You know, multiple lives. We have the possibility. So that's what I'm anticipating behind turning 35, is that there's another life waiting for me. That at the same time that I told a number of Black gay men in discussions prior to the release of Brother to Brother, because I could see something. And I was saying, many of us are going to be called, and we're not even prepared for the things we're going to be called for, but we're going to somehow do them. And I had, for instance, myself to use as an example, I had no way, as did any of us, of knowing that Joseph was going to die and that that project would be there, could have languished and could have, you know, remained dormant and unfulfilled, but I stepped right in there. And I wasn't prepared at the point that I stepped in. And I'm seeing that. I'm witnessing people like Ron Simmons, who previously he had not been, you know, speaking out at public forums about issues of sexuality and etc. And there he is, you know. It's just witnessing things around you and seeing, and I don't want to sound like I have some prophetic vision or something like that, but you can see things at times, so that the history even of this time that we're going through seems incredibly important to me, that I have been now in the last few months making sure that I get audio copies of the programs being presented. If there are videotapes being done, I need a copy of that for personal archival, because it's the whole idea of negating another generation having to ferret out and figure out, no, this is how we lived, this is what we represented in our time. What this may mean in any significant way to your time is for you to determine, and that we tried to see as far ahead as we could, but we did the best we could in that department given what we were up against within the time that we lived. But there's a lot of good that I think the next generation will have to work with, and there's a lot of good that lesbian and gay cultural outpouring is going to do for the larger discussion of sexuality within human societies. So again, there's no complaints. They can call me faggot. They could say that, well, your work is going to be in a box. I've resisted all of that and continue. That's somebody else's box. That's your box. I don't see a box. I see, a horizon that's unlimited. I see, as Samuel Delaney says, the possibility of possibilities. I'm black. That's not a box. That's your box. You see what I'm saying? And so you continually resist these things, and at the same time figure out how to nurture your life force, how to bring forth your vision, your voice, So.
Just checking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that was wonderful, Essex.
I think we hit it.
I think we did.
Yeah.
I just hope we got it.
Well, now let me put it on stop.